in rural parts of India who are from the lowest castes. They are first-generation learners from their families, and they also happen to be from religious minorities. And in our work, what we are really trying to do is to build mastery in subjects like English, but also enhance their socio-emotional skills and life skills so that they're able to take decisions at crucial and critical junctures in their lives outside of school settings. And with that, we also have thematic areas of work, for example, digital literacy and financial literacy. Now, in doing this, we work with a very specific set of government schools which were built to reduce school dropouts and delay child marriages. And so we are basically scaling up through that system across the country. And then in doing that, we just wanted to go all out. And we work with teachers in school. We work with government officials at various layers. We work with wardens because these are also residential schools. And we work with parents. And to do that, we use a hybrid approach. So we not only do in-person trainings and workshops, but we also use something called as interactive voice response system that works on your phones without internet to really create and build that village. We all know that it takes a village to raise a child, and our vision is really to build a village to raise and push a girl child forward. And in doing that, we've resorted to something that Diane was saying, every way possible. And so we use in-person aspects in our work, but we also use technology to kind of support that. Now, our main vision is for the girls to be able to participate and to have a voice in the kind of life they want to design for themselves. And in doing that, not just that, but also the ability to use the tools that are super important and critical to enable them to do that. And that is why basically we are engaging multiple stakeholders to create this kind of ecosystem for them.
Can I just ask you a brief follow-up on that? When you say girls designing their lives, is that a tough obstacle to overcome? I mean, how much desire is there? And how's the progress of that been?
Well, if you look at girls, when you speak to them, they have immense desires to do things that they have seen in TV, in media, to become doctors, engineers, to go into space, to become astronauts. But I think it's often the structural barriers, and perhaps we'll talk about that a little more, but those are the obstacles that kind of are a hindrance to their progress. A lot of it rests in socio-cultural norms. For example, simple examples, a girl is not able to go out after 8 p.m. to buy milk, to come back and cook something for herself. A girl is not able to go for tuition classes because she gets harassed. So these are everyday realities of the girls we work with. So there is a lot of aspirational value, though, and tech does play a huge role in that.
It's fascinating, thank you. Melanie, Google's put a lot of emphasis on diversity. Why women leadership?
Well, I'll say we put a lot of emphasis on diversity, but equity and inclusion as well. And if you think about equity and gender equity, equity recognizes that not everybody has the same starting space. And so we put a lot of focus on women and women leaders because we want to make sure that women have equal representation in the workplace, but that cascades to the leadership pipeline. And so Ananya is one of our brilliant recipients of Google's Impact Challenge for Women and Girls, but that's really important. That's why we do digital skills training, to make sure that we're building skills and capabilities, but also providing access and networks. But think about it. That translates to the workplace. What do women need in the workplace? We need access, we need networks, and that's really critically important to being able to add our voice, not fit our voice, but add our voice.
Great. And Gina, you work directly with women entrepreneurs and business owners and startup founders to accelerate growth and help leaders realize their vision for social impact. What do you think are the greatest barriers to women's economic development in this space?
So again, my focus is mainly working with entrepreneurs, right? And going back to your point, it's 100% it's access. It's access to many different things. You know, there's a lot of education and information out there, but the right knowledge at the right time is critical. Having access to those networks that provide not only peers, but also mentors and more so sponsors that will open up greater opportunities, including markets. Technology is a piece that we know is a huge barrier. We have to increase efficiency of operations, and you need technology in order to do that. But how do you make that shift, right? And that is not always an easy jump to make. And then obviously the big elephant in the room that we always talk about is finance. I mean, the access to finance barrier is significant, it is global, it is ginormous, and it isn't something that we're going to be able to address within a few weeks of a workshop, right? It takes looking at a multi-sector approach to really understand these barriers and figure out how we not only work with the entrepreneurs to prepare for these opportunities, but how do we address the systemic changes that need to happen and actually move on those issues as well.
And have you crystallized a vision on how that has to happen?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, from our perspective, and this is some of what we've done through our VV Grow Fellowship and some of the other programs that we run, is understanding, again, every entrepreneur is at a different stage. So we have to understand where to meet them, where they are, to be able to actually push and move that needle, right? Having them spend all this time understanding and learning knowledge that isn't really right for them is not the best use of our resources. So how do we mobilize a network of actors that includes policymakers to understand what those issues are, banks and other funders if we're looking at the finance aspect, the right mentors, the right technical assistance providers, all of those that will actually be able to help them move, okay, what is that next step, and do that successfully.
And Melanie, I know you're obviously at a ginormous, to use that word, company right now, but you have a lot of experience in and around Silicon Valley. Can you talk about those obstacles to women in technology, in entrepreneurism, in innovation?
Well, it's all of that, and I think Gina talked about it too. If we start with access, really at the early levels, it's about how do you get the technical skills to get into like those, you know, job fields. So if you think about math and the importance of math skills, are we gearing, you know, our girls towards math? Are we giving them coding skills? So we start really early with building coding skills through a program called Code Next, where we actually go into marginalized communities in Oakland, in New York, and we're taking that to particularly girls of color. Because if we think about like marginalized identities, intersectionality, where we're looking at the intersection of lived experience across other identities, women of color are falling out at an even faster rate than women overall. And so it's the access, it's the pipeline building, but it's also providing the very real skills. So the grants that we give through Google.org, we've given $90 million since 2015, $25 million through the Impact Challenge for girls and women to start to correct for this, but also to encourage other companies to do the same, because it's a collective that it takes to move the needle, and we all have a part in gender equity.
And can you talk about just a little bit the setbacks during COVID, during the pandemic for women?
Absolutely. I mean, we saw women fall out of the workplace at such a great rate. One of the things that we've done and are continuing to do at Google, we made sure we responded to the moment by increasing caregivers leave for women, providing additional benefits and keeping people whole, helping to set up home offices. And so while we saw attrition, we were buffered in that we didn't see women fall out at the same rate. We have employee resource groups, so we have a moms group, a parents group, we have a women's group, but through those types of communities, so much best practice sharing about what to do, how to do. Think about the COVID babies that were born and how did we help moms come back into the workplace, and then the number of women that we onboarded virtually, and we know that women were the caregivers, you know, not just for children, but for parents and extended family as well. And so these are the types of things that we have to talk about more openly and more transparently so that we can all add to what it takes for women to be successful. Because women falling out of the workforce, like we're gonna like continue to pay for this as a society, and then the girls that weren't in school. So if we, not just the women who fell out of the workplace, what about the young girls that fell out of the education system, and how do we go back and retrain?
And Ananya, you really facing that, girls falling out of the education system and earlier childhood marriages, right, as a result of the pandemic. Can you talk about that? What are you seeing and how are you addressing it?
Yeah, so in fact, before COVID, our work was placed in the institutional spaces of schools. And when the schools shut down, these again, because again, going back to the idea of marginalization, there is no education that was happening for the girls when they were sent back homes. And for the first time, we were shifted from the institutional space of school to the space inside of their homes. And even though I come from India, it is really hard to understand what their lived realities are without doing proper research and exploration. And so we went, our entire programs were pivoted around understanding what are the challenges that the families are facing, A, and B, to really engage parents very, very deeply and strongly. And the third part was introduction of technology in not letting the connection between education and the lives of the girls disrupt or break. Now, there were...
Can you just explain that a little bit? What did you mean by that?
Yeah. So what we did was, during this time, we were having a constant engagement through phone calls with a volunteer-led team with the parents of the girls, where our objective was 3. One is that the phone calls signal that the schools still have a pair of eyes on the families. And so it's not possible for them, and the phone call is going to come again, asking how your daughter is doing. And so it's not that you leave them in isolation without any form of communication from the school system. Number 2 is to understand what are the challenges that you are facing when your girl wants to study during this time. It could be lack of phones as devices. It could be gendered access to technology, so who owns the phone inside of a household. It could be financial crisis, so I don't have the money to get internet on my phone. It could be all sorts of things. And the third thing is, we were constantly asking, what is it that works for you? So we tried internet, we tried radio, and that is when we came to IVRS, because that was a system that worked for the people. Very simply, IVRS is basically the system that we use in customer care calling. So it works on your phone, but it doesn't use internet. And what we did is we collaborated with the school teachers, and we created contextually responsive content. So just stories which are few minutes long, but they are mapped on to the main thematic areas of the school curriculum. And then we had follow-up questions on mathematics, on health, on COVID awareness, anything that you want, you can create that. But I would say one thing here, that when we were debriefing as to why the IVRS program was successful, the tipping point did not lie in tech. The tipping point lied in the volunteer-led interactions with the parents, because those were the opportunities and spaces where we negotiated for the girls' time to use and access the phones. And so that was also very, very surprising for us, because no matter how much investment we would have done here, if you don't have inroads into the community, if you don't have trust and buy-in of the community, it perhaps will not work. And I think that was something that we realized, that to keep the engagement going on, the engagement also needs to be consistent, because you're giving opposing signals which are lesser in number compared to the signals that they are getting from other actors in the society. So if you want things to change, specifically norms to change, the signals have to be consistent over a period of time. So this kept happening, and there were human beings who took time out. During COVID, we had volunteers from school-going children to women who were 50 years old, and they would give calls to the parents to understand exactly what was happening in their households. So volunteering also became a huge part of our organization during this process.
So you have to be basically an advocate for the girls, more broadly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Gina a question, and then I would like to open it up to all of you. Please get your questions ready, input, ideas, and so on. Gina, we all, you and I, have experienced things that work, mentorship, access to networks. What, in your mind, is the most effective intervention to help women succeed as entrepreneurs?
I love this question, right? And it's interesting because anytime we have conversations with potential partners or even women that come to the program, it's like, why did you all venture into entrepreneurship? There are so many programs out there. There's tons of incubators, accelerators. Why you? And I think in the end, it comes down to the bottom line that the transformational element that we have seen is the focus on leadership, right? The business is not going to succeed on its own. It has everything to do with the woman that leads it. And so the fact that we have embedded the leadership journey into our program, and that is one of the most fundamental components of the program, I mean, it's something that you can't, do without. On top of that, though, is really the relationships that they form along the way, right? It's the relationships with peers, with staff, with the trainers, with our technical assistance providers. Those relationships allow them to build bonds of trust, which then build confidence, which also then builds their tolerance for risk and seeking out other greater opportunities. So that, for me, is, the recipe for success.
I like that idea, building your appetite for risk. That's a great line. Questions? Yes. Tell us who you are first.
Hi. Can you hear me? I am Bea from Mexico, living in Miami since a month ago. And this is because the current government persecuted me politically. They exposed my name, they exposed my personal data, etc. That's another story. But my question is because what happens to me happened because in Latin America, not only in Mexico, we are having really poor opportunities for girls and women to get to know other type of realities. So is Google focused on Latin America? Like, do they have any type of program that we, the Latin women that are here today, that we can help you, like, to encourage them to get into and to reduce this kind of situations?
Absolutely. So I'd love to talk to you about Grow with Google. It's where we teach digital skills training and digital skills readiness, including Latin America. Like, there's over 50 countries that we've done these trainings in, and we've trained over 35 million women. I mean, what we find is what you're saying is that like 35% of women entrepreneurs actually don't feel adequately prepared with digital skills. Even here today, we have Angelina Darasaw, who leads our digital coaching program with Grow with Google and can talk to you about resources as well. And so there's so much that we could do to help partner. And then just finally, I just want to extend my heart to you for what you've been through and just commend you and celebrate you for the resilience that you've exhibited.
Ditto on that. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Aisata, and I'm from Sierra Leone, West Africa. So I actually run an organization called Voice of Women Africa, which is about women and girls leadership. We mentor girls at university and high school level, and we support women who are running for elected office. But you can't divorce the leadership question from the economic empowerment. Without that, we can't do anything else. So our economic empowerment area is Afrilosophy, a social enterprise where we actually train the women in their businesses and we help them with access to finance. And when I talk about access to finance, I'm not talking about a $100,000 or $1 million loan. Something as little as $20 makes a difference to that woman's business because she might be running a $20 business. So now you've doubled her opportunities. And it's the first time a lot of those women actually have access to any finance because they don't have collateral, they don't have any formal registered businesses. So we have now a group of 250 that I'm struggling with because the loans they have is the money they save themselves, but we finance the group's creation, the training, the teacher that supports them to learn about the different areas of financial management. My question is, it's a long way from there to a Google Impact Fund, for example, and I see myself as a little bit above those women in terms of access to finance because I'm struggling to finance the stuff they're doing. How do we grow or scale? How do we scale but be very careful about inclusion? So access to financing, and if there's $1 million and that woman can't actually absorb it, then we are not scaling with inclusion. So how do we make sure that in scaling, we're not excluding those who need it the most, basically?
We have to build it in. I mean, we have to build sustainable equity. I mean, and this is what Google has done as an example with our racial equity commitments, which were both internal and external, where we're translating the energy of the moment into enduring solutions, both internally and externally. And so to do that, though, we have to bake it in. When I talked about intersectionality earlier, we have to recognize like the lived experiences across multiple identities, and that's exactly what you're talking about, that to be a woman, but to be a woman of color. To, you know, as a Black woman, what does that mean, and is there something double happening from a discrimination standpoint? And so the collective responsibility that we have through Google for Startups, we're, you know, able to work with like small businesses, small startups. Think about the number through Google for Africa. We have a program, but the number of people that are running businesses from their cell phones, and so we've made that technology cheaper so that to innovate for creators and to make sure that that's accessible. And so, you know, all of our collective responsibility through our corporate and social organizations is to bake that equity in so that we're not leaving people out in our quest for doing good, and like who's left out as we look to the left and the right to make sure that we're picking up. But thank you so much for your leadership and for taking a stand. And even, you know, with what you're saving, you're still making sure that you're lifting as you climb. And that's such a model for all of us.
Gina, do you have further thoughts on that?
I think the other question is, what is scale, right? And what does that mean for you? You know, I think that's something that we've grappled with over the years, and I don't think we'd be here today if we ended up prescribing to what people understand to be achievable, right? So for us, we know that our scale comes in numbers of impact, right? But we know that in order to have that transformational impact that we want to have on the women that we work with, we have to go deep. And you can't go deep with the thousands in the line of work that we have taken upon ourselves, right? So I think that's also the question that you have to ask yourself. What does success look like for you? What does that mean? And understanding that women entrepreneurs are not monolithic. You know, they're at different stages. Who are you trying to impact? What does that look like? And how does that future growth have to evolve?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Rehema Kasule from Uganda. I'm an independent consultant supporting women to unlock more capital. And so my question, since we are talking about $1 million, how can Google help these women who have bold ideas to unlock millions of dollars? Because guess what? If I ask any of these women who are doing incredible work, they will say they are operating between 100,000 to $1 million, maybe. How can we unlock more capital? How can we have our footprint felt globally? How can we be able to pitch ideas to get access to that funding. Because today, more than ever, when you approach someone, the first thing they are going to do is to look up your name. And these women don't have that footprint. How can you help? Because as women, we can't do small things anymore. We can't, but we need the money. And how do we get the money? Is the question, the $1 million question I have. And I mean real money. No, not 100,000. We've touched that. We need millions.
It's $1 trillion, $13 trillion opportunity space, so I think we need more than $1 million, but it's critical. At Google, it's really grow with Google, and so if you go to growwithgoogle.com and you look up the programs that we have there to look at that, but I think what you're saying, like even deeper than that, is how do we as women come together as a collective to innovate, to support innovation, because there are reasons why, women aren't innovating and aren't living out loud into that creativity, because they don't believe that it's valued and they don't believe that there's space for it. And how do we continue to create and curate the types of spaces that Vital Voices has to be able to do just that, to affirm it? And what we're trying to reach to the root of is, like, even when you think of that idea, like, don't second guess yourself. Make sure that there's a community around you to support, like, even where you're ideating, because some folks, some girls, those dreams don't even make it, that far. And I think it's such a huge opportunity, in addition, for women to support women. My favorite Madeleine Albright quote is, there's a special place in hell for women that do not support women. And so we have to support women and surround them and, give money, point to the places of opportunity too. And so I think there's so much loaded in your question that we'd love to talk about specifically, but so much for all of us as well to lean into.
Other questions? As we move on to the next panel, I wanted to go through and ask each one of you, what is the single most important thing that has to happen to accelerate economic empowerment for women? Ananya.
I think just reiterating, but meeting people where they are, choosing to work with the most marginalized. They will be few and they will be harder to reach, but you must put your energy there, because it's really important for them, and I speak this for the girls we work with and for girls around the world. It's really important for them to have a seat at the table. And what I mean by that is, we've known that technology has also increased inequalities. So people who have access and people who know how to use are more productive and they use it to their advantage. But people who don't have access are really left far behind. And this really goes beyond economic empowerment also, I would say. This is something we are talking about, social empowerment. We are talking about well-being of people. We are talking about legal empowerment. And to be able to make or empower people to use these tools in the way they want, I think would be remarkable.
Thank you. Gina?
So I would say we have to focus on the human being, right? It's not just the business and the entrepreneurship venture that they're launching. They're human beings. And so what are their other needs? What are the other barriers that they're facing that is actually inhibiting their growth, right? And their pursuit of greater opportunities. We can no longer look at things in silo. Look at everything that's happened as a result of COVID. Everything is interconnected. So we need to now open our eyes and have a grander view of what we need to do holistically.
I would say we need more women at the table, at all of the tables, and we actually need more women in leadership. And so we see like more women entering, but we need more women to progress faster so that we're giving influence to the very types of things that we've all talked about. But if we're not there sitting in those leadership roles, we don't have the opportunity to do that.
As Ginny Rometty would say, you can't be what you can't see. Thank you all so much for this and for being here today. Actually, stay there because you're going to watch a short film and another panel. I want to thank Ananya, Gina, and Melanie. Thank you so much. Really great insights and a good fire starter for this conversation. Thank you all. Let's give them a big round of applause.
We are trying to break the intergenerational vicious cycle of human trafficking.
I'm trying to create a safer Mexico through reforming the prison system.
And the violence against women.
Increase access to finance,
Energy
to women.
Poverty in rural Nigeria.
We see our world, we see the way it is, and we think this is not okay, and we think we are going to change it.
I knew that I have a mission and I have to do something to help women.
There are so many people in the world doing great things. There are also so many people in the world who are having the same challenges that you're having.
Vital Voices helps me solve the problems that I don't know how to solve.
I've had people come to me, what is this Vital Voices? They said, you're a leader. What is it you want to do in your community?
They are truly empowering women through practical tools and enhancing technical skills.
I joined as a fellow on the VV program. At that time, I was trying to stabilize my business so that I could get involved in other things like activism and social impact. My name is Xiomara Diaz. I'm from Nicaragua. The Garden Cafe is a breakfast, lunch, and dinner restaurant. We also have a store where over 50 entrepreneurs sell their products. After the Vital Voices training, the Garden Cafe grew rapidly. Our sales increased by at least 200%, which allowed us to employ more people from the community. I was partnered with a mentor to create a strategic plan for Up Nicaragua, which is the nonprofit that we lead. Up Nicaragua stands for Unleash Potential Nicaragua. Girls get access to 760 hours of coursework between English, storytelling, human rights for free. The program is paid for by products that we sell at the Garden Cafe. Girls can expand their horizons, explore new professions and new careers that they could study. Many times, we don't know that we have the power to create positive change in our communities. The Vital Voices Network has given me the confidence to dream bigger than I would have on my own. They help me stay committed to more than just myself and my business.
It's not just one-time program and that's it, you're done.
The difference with Vital Voices is that us as individuals, we are the hero. We are the ones that they invest in. They take care of you for extended period of time.
It stopped me from giving up.
It is a network of women who are active, who are engaged, who are addressing real problems every day.
I felt I was not alone in my mission and in my cause.
I will never be doing the kind of work that I'm doing today, you know?
It's 18,000 women that are changing the world. When there's a group saying, hey, I have your back, that makes the whole difference.
Hello, everybody. We're going to start the second panel right now. Thanks so much. I know there's been a lot of good conversation today. Well, hello, my name is Zincle Asamoah. I'm a reporter with NBC News, and I'm joined by Jen Klein. She's the director of the White House Gender Policy Council. And right now, we're going to talk about the economic empowerment of women and girls. So, Jen, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. And I can feel the energy in the room. It's okay. It's okay. I have African roots, so I get it. There's always some noise in the background. It's part of the sitch. So you have worked for the White House now and in the past, also Time's Up. You've been at the State Department International Center for Research of Women. And I know that the White House now has this Gender Policy Council. And something that's unique about it is you have 10 key priorities. Economic security for women is one of them. Walk us through those priorities and how did economic security make the list?
Well, we, for the first time, first of all, there is a Gender Policy Council for the first time in the White House, and that's significant. Thank you. That's the way I feel. which is significant because there have been many or several other instances of initiatives. And there's a couple things that are different about the Gender Policy Council. The first is that it's a policy council, which I think really shows the priority that this administration places on gender equity and gender equality, both in the United States and around the world. And the second is that we're focused on gender, and we'll talk a little bit more later, I think, about how all of everybody's pieces of their identity fit together. But it was very important for us to keep a laser focus on women and girls, but also name that gender is broader than women and girls. So as you noted, we released for the first time ever also a national gender strategy. Other countries have had gender strategies. The US has never had one before. So,
can you say that again so that we're clear?
Yeah. The US has never had one before.
Okay, but we do now.
But we do now. And as you noted, it has 10 priorities. And I will confess up front, if we've gotten any criticism of this strategy, which by the way, remarkably little, it's that it was too comprehensive, that there were 10 priorities, to which I respond, guilty as charged, right? Like, there are 10 because, first of all, women are 50% of the population. Gender equity should be embedded in everything we think about, both global and domestic. So we ended up with 10. And I'll name a few others. You focused on economic security, obviously, but health, education, leadership, which and democratic participation, conflict. Really across the board, we're thinking about how women and girls and gender equity and equality really need to be woven into all of our policies as the USG. And for all obvious reasons, economic security is really often at the center. It's connected to all those other things, which is another important part of our strategy, is that we're very mindful of the fact that all of these things are actually interconnected. So you can't work on economic security if you're not also thinking about healthcare, if you're not also thinking about gender-based violence, but thinking about how to give people the tools they need to be economically secure is really essential to their autonomy, to their dignity, to their ability to participate fully.
And you've talked a bit about the fact that even if I look in this room, right, women, we represent so many different groups and demographics. So how are you thinking about intersectionality when it comes to your policy? And also, does the White House's Gender Policy Council reflect the demographics of women in the country?
Yes. To the first point about how we think about it, before we got to those 10 priorities, the first part of the strategy actually names these sort of underlying principles or values which guide the whole strategy. And the first one of that is that these things need to be intersectional. And that's in obvious ways like race, gender, age, disability, all of the things that make up somebody's identity. And it's also in some of the not as obvious ways, and I touched on this already, which is the way the issues intersect. So that is sort of very much part and parcel of our thinking. And the council itself, it very much represents America and the world. We are tiny. This is the little known fact. I'll share it.
How tiny? How many of you are there?
How tiny? Well, we just lost one of our great heroes. Her name is Kalisha DeSouza's Figures. She just left literally yesterday. I haven't recovered yet. But so there are 4 of us left. And it is a very diverse group of all women, I will say. But the secret to how we are going to implement this strategy and the secret to the work that we're doing is that the council is, every cabinet secretary and agency head is formally a member of the Gender Policy Council. And they have all appointed senior designees. So if you talk about the staff that sits in the White House every day, it's very small. But it is a very broad group across the administration. I would say in agencies which are obviously connected to gender, like the Department of Health and Human Services or the Department of Labor or the State Department or USAID, but also agencies where you might not have thought, they would have thought they are part of this work. And my favorite is NASA, but it is front and center in our thinking as well.
That's amazing. And of course, you know, you have these policy ideas, you have these priorities, but you need money behind it. And I know that President Biden on International Women's Day this year announced plans to ask Congress for $2.6 billion, with a B, $2.6 billion to advance gender equality. And a portion of that, $200 million, would be specific to economic security of women and girls globally. What does implementation look like for that if that money goes through?
Yes, so the 2.6 is the amount of foreign assistance, so it's just foreign assistance, that goes to be either in a primary way, which means this is a program that's directly related to gender issues, or in what we refer to as a secondary way. So, you know, this is a program that seemingly has nothing to do with gender, but it actually does, like, you know, infrastructure, right?
Right, and that $200 million would be specific to
that's the 2.6.
Right.
Of the 2.6, as you noted, there's a fund which is called the Gender Equity and Equality Action Fund. I think I named it, and it is a terrible name.
One more time, so we retain it.
And if anyone has better ideas, it is the Gender Equity and Equality Action Fund, and it has some awful acronym. I think we say GIA.
GIA, but it's okay.
Okay.
We can dig it, yes.
Okay. But what it is actually no laughing matter, which is, as you said, it is started as a $100 million fund. It is now grown already in fiscal year 22 and 23 to a $200 million program, which is specifically designated in developing countries to advance women's economic security. And one of the things I always note about it, again, which we just already touched on, is that if you want to advance women's economic security, you have to focus on that sort of the surround sound of what people need to be able to get to work, stay at work, thrive at work, support their families, and that means, you know, equal pay, and that means access to good jobs. It also means care, child care, elder care, you know, very much front and center. And as we all know, women bear a disproportionate amount of caregiving responsibilities, both informally, but also in the caregiving formal sector. And so one of the first things we are doing as part of this fund, and was just announced last week, is joined the World Bank and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to launch a global child care incentive fund, which is designed to help low and middle income countries really build that child care infrastructure. And, you know, just to note that even the notion that child care is infrastructure, I think is a huge leap forward for the world, not just for the United States government, but the fact that we are acknowledging that these are the things that, you know, the human investment that we need to make in order to have people be able to be economically secure and to actually advance economic growth more generally. You know, I was just in a conversation where when Vital Voices started, Elise Nelson was saying, we didn't have the data. Well, we have the data now, and we know that investing in women and ensuring that they're in the labor force and ensuring that they have the economic security to care for themselves and their families is actually tied directly to economic growth and stability more generally.
Right, and what about, you know, we've talked about individuals and individual women. What about civil society groups and funding for them, especially, you know, you represent a government agency. Talk to us about that.
Yes, and I should have said that, you know, in creating this strategy, part of what we did was reach out to hundreds of stakeholder organizations, so civil society, but also other governments, the private sector, philanthropy, et cetera. And so in the priorities and in the giving of this money to projects around the world, there is money available to go directly to civil society, because in some places, in many places, civil society organizations, and I should say the women who often run them, are the people who know best what their community needs, and that's why it's a good investment.
And will some of that funding go to those groups?
Yes. Yes, it will.
Okay, and I want you all to be simmering also, because I will turn to you for questions, so be ready. And you, Jen, have the Herculean challenge of not just thinking about domestic priorities, but also global issues. Of course, I would be remiss, as I said, I'm a reporter with NBC, not to ask you about a big domestic issue right now, which is that leaked SCOTUS draft of the Roe v. Wade, suggesting that the majority of the court may overturn this, what many consider a pivotal gender policy in the United States. What are you saying to President Biden and the First Lady as director of their Gender Policy Council in the White House?
Well, the truth is, I don't need it. I don't need to say it to them. They have already said it to me. And one of the first things, actually, when Texas passed the very, very restrictive, extreme law that they passed in September, the president asked the Gender Policy Council and the White House Council to think about what responses we could have. And we've announced, excuse me, a bunch of things already. But now that this latest turn, which it's a draft. We don't know if this is where they end up, but we're going to assume that's where they're going to end up until proven otherwise, which is, as you said, a draconian measure to overturn nearly 50 years of precedent in this country to protect women's constitutional rights, women's access to abortion. And by the way, has threats to lots of other rights as well. This is founded in a right to privacy in the Constitution, and the minute that right to privacy is up in question, what are the implications for that for all these other things, like contraception, like same-sex marriage, right? These things that we have come to understand as to be rights that are founded in our Constitution. Well, the minute we start thinking about they start thinking about whether privacy is an actual right that is found in the Constitution, it's very concerning. And of course, mostly, and my focus at the moment is on how do we preserve access to reproductive health and rights for women in this country, but it could go far beyond that.
And what does that look like, I wonder, because it is a draft opinion, right? So it may not happen, it very well may. And you're representing the White House. At the end of the day, this does come from the Supreme Court. And I know you referenced sort of giving suggestions after Texas's abortion laws. So what does the policy practically look like? What are you returning to President Biden with?
Well, I can't tell you all of it yet.
But what can you tell us?
We're in the room. But what I can tell you is first and foremost that there is a bill on the Hill, which is called the Women's Health Protection Act, which passed the House and it did not pass the Senate. And it probably will come up for a vote again, and it probably will fail again. And what I can't say is, but people can draw their own conclusions about what we need to do to get more people in Congress to pass that bill. Because what that bill does is it really codifies the right that is in Roe versus Wade. And that's really important because we clearly can't count on the Supreme Court anymore.
Thank you. And how, now pivoting back, we've talked domestic. How do you decide what global priorities and what domestic ones to prioritize given the breadth of issues that women face?
Yeah, it's really hard, and as I said, if we've gotten any criticism on this strategy, it's been that we took on too much and it was too ambitious. But I would say if I had to pick, and I cheat a little bit because there are three basket of issues, they're not three issues, but if I
You can still tell us.
Okay, but if I had to pick, what really I spend most of my days, and our staff spends most of our days working on, it's economic security, it's gender-based violence, and health. And not just reproductive health, all sorts of health issues that face women, health disparities, from research to prevention to treatment of disease. Yesterday I was on a call with cancer experts talking about, how do you think about the women's health disparities in cancer and how to address them, particularly for women of color, through what the president announced a couple months ago, this revitalization of the cancer moonshot. So that's just one example on a day which happened to be yesterday. But those three issues, and as I said earlier, they are really tied to each other. But again, just to take a couple more examples in terms of preventing and responding to gender-based violence, that's wherever it occurs. So one of the first things the president did was announce an independent review commission to look at sexual assault and sexual harassment in the military, and we worked closely with them to implement their recommendations. Title IX to work on sexual assault on college campuses. The president will be the first one to tell you that this year we were able to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, which was an act that he authored in 1993. It's been reauthorized several times, but it hadn't been since 2013, so it was reauthorized and really strengthened, took on some tough issues, and that was an incredibly bipartisan process of getting there. You didn't ask this question, but I will say that, while obviously reproductive rights and health can be a partisan issue, although I will also note that, a vast majority of Americans support upholding Roe versus Wade. But that can obviously be a very partisan, very contentious issue. A lot of the things I work on are not. And I like to think it's because it's obvious, right? It's obvious why it matters to people. It's obvious why this is an issue of fairness and rights, but it's also of strategic importance. And that's whether you're thinking about U.S. foreign policy or whether you're thinking about the global economy or, what you need to do to build strong and healthy communities and families.
Multi-layered, women contain multitudes. And with that, I'd love to hear from some of you. Do you have any questions for Jen about her work with the White House or policy? Please.
Thank you so much for being here. Hi, hello. Ooh, hello. Is it working or? There we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Just such an honor to hear the work that you're doing and all the progress that's been made. I want to just go a little bit back to the Roe Wade situation that is on our hands right now. And I know, Jen, that you just mentioned, or you alluded to the bill that passed, but then didn't make it past the Senate. It's probably not going to happen again, like you mentioned. And then when you asked what's going to happen in terms of protection measures, you also alluded to we need to get more seats in terms of making sure that we're able to.
I didn't say that.
Oh, well, maybe that was my perceived. My perceived conclusion. Knowing that Democrats, they're a bipartisan organization. We are a bipartisan organization, but knowing that the Democrats already have a very slim majority and that the House is likely going to flip during midterms, sadly, what's the contingency plan in place, or is there a contingency plan in place to make sure that women's rights continue to be protected past the next couple of months?
Thank you.
I would, I have to point out it's hard, right? The reason that is the obvious answer, the Women's Health Protection Act, is because it would be a national protection. So the answer to your question is this is going to fall to states, and we're going to end up in a country where some women have access. Yeah, there are 26 states that are poised to enact bans if Roe is overturned. 13 have trigger laws that automatically go into place. So, in addition to pointing toward what can be done at the national level, there's going to, the governors and state legislators are going to be the front lines. And so, there are things, and as I said, I can't talk about them yet, but there are things that we can do, with executive action. But I will say, the states become more and more important.
Thank you. And we can do one more question. Yes.
I really didn't want to hug the mic, but you talked about the multitudes of women that we are, and I'm multi-layered. I used to be a member of parliament. I was actually elected in Sierra Leone, and I sponsored the Safe Abortion Bill as a private bill. It passed through Parliament, but then our president didn't sign, so it didn't hit assent to it. Talking about the health bill that's stuck on the Hill, it sounds something similar. And I'm really curious as to, in 2022, how heavily legislated women's health is still is. And in a country where, let me say, American freedom of speech and it's aspirational for a lot of countries. Congratulations on your first national action plan, by the way. So I am wondering, within those 10 comprehensive steps, how much are you going to be focused on legislation? Dynamic legislation is what actually moves the agenda. So the freedom of speech, and we talk about all the issues that we want to challenge, but without legislation, a lot of these things are seasonal. So it depends on which administration is there and what their focus is. And I'm really impressed that you have a president you can rely on. He's reliable. He speaks his mind. You already know where he is, even before. Whereas these are issues that usually the executive don't want to handle. So imagine we passed a bill in Parliament. It was a struggle. It wasn't like it flowed through. But when it got to the executive, he didn't sign. And we were stuck in limbo. And then you have women who don't have the economic power to access justice, and therefore they can't really protest these things in a way that they can overturn that kind of decision. How do we focus really at this point to ensure that legislation will protect women long-term, not just for the now?
Yeah, that is such a great question, and it strikes me how truly global all of these issues are, right? The issues that you're facing are the issues we're facing, and if anybody ever thought the United States was exceptional in this way, I think they know that's not true anymore. I think in our strategy we have a 10th priority, which is, we debated whether it should be the first or the last, and we went with the last because what it was women's leadership and democratic participation. And I think that is the answer to your question. And one of the things that, again, the president himself is very proud of and talks about all the time is the way that, you asked about my office, but the way that his administration looks like America. He's appointed more Black women judges to the Court of Appeals than any other president had ever appointed before put together. So that representation matters to accomplishing some of the goals that you talked about. And I totally hear you in terms of legislation. I mean, the thing I would say is, while much of what we are working on, or some of what we are working on, is hard to accomplish, we've just been talking about the obvious example, there are a lot of examples where, as I was noting before, where there is bipartisan support, and finding those places and advancing those bills is really, I think, like it's a two-track strategy. So the Violence Against Women Act is one example. The president signed in the beginning of March a bill that was called the Ending Forced Arbitration for Sexual Harassment and Sexual Assault Bill, which is basically, what sounds small because you can't force women into arbitrating disputes over sexual harassment or sexual assault, but it is just one of those barriers in the workplace. It's obviously violence too, but it's also a barrier to being able to participate and succeed and get promoted at work. So, all of these things. And that was a very bipartisan effort. There's another bill, this one is hard. There's another bill that I really hope gets passed by the Senate this spring or summer called the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. Again, very bipartisan. So we look for those opportunities to do what we can on a bipartisan basis. And then, as you said, it's never as long-lasting, but sometimes executive action. I never underestimate the power of a president, his pen, but also his words. And by the way, an extremely strong advocate in the vice president, who has worked on so many of the issues that I work on long before I did. And she is front and center in this administration for that reason, and for so many other reasons, but also for that reason. So, it's a little bit of everything, I'd say.
Thank you. And I like to end on a high note. So obviously this panel and the one before have been focusing on the economic empowerment of women. So just finish the sentence. For you, what are the biggest challenges and opportunities? Just in a sentence. What's the biggest opportunity for women ahead when it comes for economic empowerment, and the biggest challenge?
The biggest opportunity, well, the biggest challenge is addressing some of the barriers to getting women the ability to participate fully in the economy. But we know what to do. So the biggest opportunity is that we know what to do, and we just need to do those things. And I believe that we have the political will to do that. I mean, not to end on a low note, but I'm going to get to the high note. We've all lived through a pandemic. So I keep saying we had a health crisis, and on top of that we had an economic crisis, and on top of that we had a caregiving crisis. The good news, and it's hard to say there's good news, but the good news, or the opportunity to use your word, is that we all see what has long existed, particularly for women of color, but now we are going to do something about it. And I really do remain optimistic that, this world, this country is not looking away.
Well, Jen Klein, Director of the White House's first Gender Policy Council, thank you so much for your time.